A very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Designing Cities for All.
The 2-year activity program of Pakhuis
in which we take a deep dive into designing products,
places and systems for all.
At every level, we can see certain communities being marginalized, being taken advantage of, and it's all part of the design.
When you're neurodiverse, you're in a world that isn't designed for you.
We're not the only species on the planet. The city needs to be also a city for the other species.
And we need to do something because the old structures in which we worked don't work.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
Instead of saying, what can we do to mitigate the impacts? We need to start asking ourselves, what is causing that?
Design is political, that we need to design processes, that we are all different, but there are things that unite us.
These are the things that need to be on the table, that need to be recovered in order to redesign the society.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
How do we teach design in a way where students can be really critical of the systems of power that have informed and dominated design?
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
I think it's always some kind of a co-creation process, and you have to make very little steps and then figure out together what works and what doesn't.
it takes as much time to do something good as it takes time to do something bad.
All design tells a story.
But there's also a bit of a need to not just write ourselves into the past, but also kind of write ourselves into the future.
I invite you so much to join my path of liberation, and I'm hopefully being welcomed by your path of liberation.
We have to heal collectively. We have to help each other understand some of these constructs that actually divide us.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Hi and welcome here tonight. You just watched the wrap-up of the first 2 years of Designing Cities for All, a research and activities program that takes a very deep dive into designing products and places and systems that work for all. And in the next period, 2023 and 2024, we're exploring the concept of regenerative design, so stretching it more, together with 6 DCFA fellows and lots of designers, storytellers, artists, scientists, experts. My name is Lynn Zebeda, and before I say anything else, I would love for us to watch the next video together.
The world is changing all the time, and you know it ain't right. Yeah, I know you think twice. And love, it takes you on a ride and leaves you with no respite. Well, I think I've done my time, but I don't want to cry. So take me where the bluebirds sing, while we lose everything. There's too much poisoning. And fly me where the birds still fly, 'cause smoke fills up our sky, 'cause we ran out of time. Oh well, we tried.
The roads belong to the British people, not a selfish minority.
We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing.
Global warming, it's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry.
When the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, how are people to heat their home?
But it's morally right to honour our promises.
Well, maybe this was meant to be. Our mother wanted peace, and we were not conceived. Or maybe we were meant to win, but not enough good drowned out the sin. They watched the world cave in, but I can't work out why. So take me where the bluebirds sing, while we lose everything. There's too much poisoning. And fly me where the birds still fly, 'cause smoke fills up our sky, 'cause we ran out of time. Oh well, we tried, 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 we tried. Oh well, we tried.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old, and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future. Why does it take young people like me up on a fucking gantry on the M25 for you to listen?
A rapidly closing window. Can I just ask you, everyone who watched it just now, what struck you in this video? Who can share something about how you feel? Yeah. Here's the mic.
I feel blessed that there's so many people taking responsibility, and you try to do your own thing, but there are always people taking it further.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
I kind of felt the opposite.
You felt the opposite,
I
yeah.
felt that there's people out there doing great things for it, but it still doesn't resonate with the people that have the most power to change things. So, I'm very moved, of course, but I wish that this reached the people that are not in this room, but the people that haven't seen it yet and that don't know what it is about.
Yeah. So two sides of the same coin in a way. We're here in the first episode of a new DCFA fellowship with Shinta Oosterwaal titled Beings of the Economy. And together we will revisit maybe the two sides of this coin, the idea of our current situation, the economy, and also how to imagine it and how to transform it into something that can be a sanctuary for all life, in your words. Why did you choose this song to kick off your fellowship?
It's highly personal, I guess. It's to me, it really appeals to a certain innocence. There's something that, to me, she appears to be seeking.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to me, because as I look at the economy right now, then we've quite lost that. And it speaks to me because personally it speaks to me. Apparently I'm seeking for a certain kind of innocence, and that's why I'm working. on this.
It resonates with something deep inside. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, and in this first episode, we're going to take a zoomed out look at where we are today. What is this world that we live in, and specifically this metacrisis word that we're, what is this metacrisis we're facing, that we're living in? And what does understanding it mean for how we are in the world and how we might find a way to move forward? And we'll do that with Shinta, of course, and with Ehsan Ulhak, who is here with us. Very happy that you are. And with Jonathan Rosen, who is joining us through Zoom from the UK. And we also welcome you all, your input from the audience here. Also, everyone watching at home, you're very welcome to ask your questions. If you're at home watching from the couch and you do have a question, you can go to menti.com and use the code 51772044, and I'll receive it here on my iPad. So we're in this together. And I would love to just start with you, Shinta. Let's kind of frame this evening together. You're a researcher, a writer, author of several books, a public speaker, a consultant. People can go to you around the emergence of a new economy. And you also call yourself an uneconomist. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I was traditionally trained as an economist, but as we see, or as I can see, that its storyline is on a pathway to collapse. I also see new pathways emerging, and these pathways to me are, per definition, uneconomic.
In what sense?
Well, they speak more about values, right? So they speak more about kindness or the innocence that I was just talking about. Care, love, cooperation.
And what does the original storyline speak about of the economy?
Oh, you want to go in depth?
No, I just
yeah,
curious,
sure. So I think a couple of holy grails are the existing regime is really being challenged quite highly right now, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of holy grails, such as economic growth, for example, is really being challenged by a whole post-growth mentality and completely new ideas of asking ourselves the question: where do we want to be, and how do we want to be?
Yeah.
What do we need? What is enough? What does a quality of life mean? And these questions are only to be answered by values, right?
Yeah.
So they're, per definition, uneconomic. They don't have anything to do with economics. There's nobody on their deathbed saying, I would have been richer. I would have wanted to be richer and spend more time away from my children and the people that I love.
Yeah. That's when we define economics in narrow terms of money, basically, or how we do that now.
Yes, production, consumption, and then money measures it all.
Yeah.
So, but we have that, and you have the economic growth that's really being challenged at this moment, right? But then the other artifacts, like free market thinking, there's a complete resurrection on the idea of commoning at the moment. So you see that being challenged as well. Some new values are awakening, and then the
commoning. Does everyone know that word? Familiar with what commoning means? No.
You want to go into depth? Yeah.
Yeah, we're not into depth.
Let me just finish this line, and then we'll maybe go into depth about that. So there's the economic growth, there's the free market thinking, and then there's also, I think, extractivist capitalism.
Yeah.
That is really being challenged by the idea of regeneration at this moment. Now going into depth, that commoning, for example, as we see right now, is that people are seeking and finding ways to go around markets, as markets are not solving everything for us. So we're finding ways of doing it by ourselves, and especially we find this in situations of crisis. For example, there's hundreds of energy corporations in the Netherlands. There's food corporations. There's living corporations. There's all kinds of ways that we can, move around the market and set up self-organizing ways of provisioning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
interesting. But still, you choose to start with this metacrisis. Why did you choose that topic?
Right. Yeah. So we were also talking about why is this being called beings of the economy, right? So one of the ideas was that who here has ever shaken the hand of the economy? Nobody, right? Who has ever embraced the free market or no, hugged economic growth or gave it a kiss on the cheek?
Anyone?
Nobody ever did. These are really abstract concepts, yet they determine our lives. They dictate how we live our lives and maybe how we identify ourselves. So that's one thing. I'm seeking to make this a more humane, I mean, maybe even more than humane, really about life. And then in thinking about new economies, of course, you're thinking about transitions and that there are these transition theories, but they really lack the dimension of existentialism. So I think that there's an assignment there for all of us who are involved in this, not only researchers and academics, but all of us. And maybe even to the individual, the existential dimension might appeal to, at some point, coming of age. So I'm really keen to explore this dimension. And I think the Metacrisis and how we can dialogue about it today will help that.
Yeah, I do want to, this word of existentialism, you just throw it in, like, I mean, how can we say that in the most human way possible? What is that about for you? You want to bring in the existentialism. What is that about for you?
Yeah, to me, it's, well, to give an example in the context of economy, for example, we are allowed, it's valid to have a mindset that says, I want it and I want it now. But that's a mindset it's a mindset of a 4-year-old, right? It's infantile. And I think that the predicament that we find ourselves in at this moment really asks of us to come forth in our adulthood. So really to grow in consciousness into the next, to come of age.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a mother of a 4-year-old, I can confirm that this is what I deal with the whole day. And indeed, what humanity is maybe strangely stuck in.
And
this phase,
maybe to add to that, economics is stuck in that idea as well, because the basic premise, the basic question that it seeks to solve is how can we provide for the needs of all? But we're not providing for the needs of all. We're providing for the needs and the wants and then the privileges of all.
Yeah.
And that's our normal.
Yeah.
But our normal is abnormal.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. And tonight we're gonna also use to understand our normal, right? Like to really start seeing it for what it is. But for the whole entire fellowship, so what do you hope, just very briefly, to get out of this, so we can all hope along with you and be on the ride with you?
I'm really seeking to shine a light, more of a light, on the existential dimension of transitions. So to appeal to what is being asked of humanity.
Thank you, Shinta. Good start, right? Are we still here? Okay.
Everybody left the building.
No, we're all just like silently witnessing what's about to unfold. I would love to bring in our other speakers of today. And Jonathan, we're extremely happy that he's joining us here. He's a philosopher, a writer, a chess grandmaster, and co-founder of Perspectiva. Can you start by telling us a bit of the story behind Perspectiva?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, let me just say I'm really sorry not to be there in person. When I read the schedule for this evening, there was dinner just before the event and drinks at the bar just after. And I'll miss both of those things. So I'm very sorry not to be there and share the vibe. I hope I can help to enrich the vibe somehow from afar. So the story of Perspectiva goes back, well, not quite to the Big Bang, but it goes back a wee bit. I would situate it, well, when I got my first proper job in 2009, I'd recently become a father and stopped playing chess professionally because I wanted to root myself to one place. I was working in a place called the Royal Society of Arts, which has been described as a kind of intellectual everyman. It's the place that people come through when they have a book to sell. They have a lot of public events, and it's culturally very rich, intellectually very rich. I landed on my feet, and I quite quickly realized that if I could sell an idea to funders, I could almost do what I wanted. And so the story goes that after a little bit of training and learning the ropes of how to work in an organization, learning a little bit about the media and fundraising and management and so on, I started doing some work on behavior change, which can be done in lots of different ways. The shallow end of behavior change is kind of manipulating choices in the world, changing the price, changing the order of things, nudging in various ways to get people to do what you want them to do. The deeper end of behavior change is something more like spiritual transformation, a shift in consciousness and so on. And in essence, I began at the shallow end and sort of swam my way up to the deep end over the next few years. Meanwhile, I was also working on climate change, or as I now like to call it, climate collapse. I don't say that with any real mirth, just that I find it quite hard to say climate change now without feeling some dissonance inside, because it's such a kind of bland, flat, generic term, descriptive term, without any real effective content. So I say climate collapse not to be melodramatic, but just to be a little bit more precise and meaningful in the term. So anyway, I was working on spirituality and the climate collapse, and I realized they were kind of the same question, which was something about the relationship between the unique historical moment that we're in, something about what is going on in time. Where are we? You know, the sort of when in time are we? Combining that with who are we? You know, what is it about our nature that is somehow leading us to this position where we might really be foolish enough to destroy our only home? And it was around that point that, having done these projects on spirituality and climate collapse, I met with my co-founder, Thomas Bjorkman, who came from the Club of Rome and the post-growth world of that. And he managed to give me enough initial funds to have the courage to leave my job and set up Perspectiva, and I managed to raise funds from other places over the next 6 to 9 months. And in essence, Perspectiva, we quite quickly got the source code, which is, you know, I don't know your audience there. I'm sorry I can't see you or sense into where you're at. But, you know, the sort of common language way of understanding Perspectiva is that we're working on education, climate collapse, and democracy, right? That's this kind of, those are the kind of straightforward words. But the deeper story, the philosophical story, is that we're working on systems, souls, and society. And the reason we've come up with that language is not just because of the S's and the fact that there's alliteration there and it's memorable. It's also because at a very deep philosophical level, I think when you try to reduce reality down to some of its core elements, you find that there are broadly 3 patterns of things. And there are things as they are roughly objectively in themselves. So atoms and molecules, systems and structures. Then you have things as they are on the inside. Soul, psyche, spirit, psychology, feelings, and so on. And that's where we speak of soul. And then you have the challenge of communicating between ourselves, which is society. It's the area of discourse and symbols and words and so on. And in essence, what we realize is what we want to understand is, how do we get better at grasping this relationship between systems, souls, and society? We felt that until we can do that, we can't begin to grapple with problems like those mentioned by Shinta already. Namely that we have to somehow, we can't go spiritual bypassing and just go meditate on retreat and think that the powers that be will care. But nor is the problem entirely in power and elections and democracy. Somehow the challenge of our time seemed to me was to connect love and power, to find a way to think more deeply about the relationship between spiritual change on the one hand and political and economic change on the other. And that was the genesis of Perspectiva about 7 years ago. And since then, we've done various things. We've created an annual event. We're now a publisher. We've created a methodology called the anti-debate and various other things along the way. But that's the quick answer. Sorry if it was too long.
No, thank you for that. I think it's important to know where you're coming from and the richness that you bring with you. I would love to also bring in Essen. Essen, you're a visual artist. You make installations that really fascinate me and make me kind of reflect and laugh in equal parts. Can you say a little bit about how your work and your art is connected to what we're talking about here today?
Yeah, that's so kind of you. Yes, I mostly make sculptural installations, so I'm here as a visual artist. It's very fascinating to listen to what Cynthia and Jonathan has to say. These are the things that I don't generally deal with in my practice in the same way, but in some other ways, just the way you spoke about, or you raised the question about what existentialism is. So generally, when I talk about my work, I tend to say also that my work or my concerns revolve around the ideas of existentialism. But I think when I think of it, it's an easy way out, because I think it's also an intimidating term and also at the same time very broad term. It feels like with my first reply, I'm creating a distance between myself and the person who's in front of me. So I think I would personalize it, and I would like to say that my works are about myself, but not in a narcissist way, but in a way that it is the first question and the most basic question about myself is, what is me? What am I doing here? Then it takes me to, what are we as human beings? What are we as societies? What do we need? What do we require? Why are we here? So all these things. So those concerns are the bigger umbrellas that I work in, and then with different projects, then it leads to different concerns, sometimes about absurdity of life, sometimes about futility of human logics, sometimes about the apocalyptic position we are in.
Yeah.
So yeah, the projects vary from one to another.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for breaking down this indeed like existentialism for us. Like, what is me? What am I doing here, indeed, and what are we doing as a society? I would love to maybe hear about one of your projects. Can you give an example of?
I think according to the topic, maybe I would refer to one of the project that is called Horse. It is this one. It is a horse, and it says horse. It's an act, an invasive act by me as a maker of this work, so-called, where I walk to the horse and write the word horse on it physically. So it's not photoshopped. I actually took a brush and a paint and wrote the title, what I think, or how I define this creature. This work is about, firstly, this invasive act of wanting to define things that are outside me, according to myself and according to how I look at them. And it's titling them the way I want it. So a very invasive act again. If I give an example, maybe I talk about, let's say if I say what is a tree, then I say a tree is something that has a wooden stem, it has leaves, it gives shade, it has fruit sometimes. But most of these definitions are explanations of how a tree serves me as a human being. But maybe for a tree itself is something else. And that is what the project was also about. That horse maybe does not even know that it's a horse. For me, it's a horse. I want to keep a margin of doubt, because I don't want to force my point of view again to the horse that it definitely does not know. I think that will again be falling into the same trap.
But indeed, the absurdity of us is what this is about.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Well.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Okay, so let's dive into this metacrisis, trying to define it, trying to understand it. How many of us already have an perfect understanding of this is what metacrisis means? Of course, none of us. All right, and I think literally none of us do. So let's unpack it together with the person who can lead us through this best, which is Jonathan. Because Jonathan, you're one of the leading thinkers on this topic of metacrisis. So can you explain it to us, and also why it's important to discuss it and understand it?
Okay, so before I do that, I once called metacrisis a word that only a philosopher could love. And
Wait, can you repeat that?
I once said that metacrisis, the term, it was a term that only a philosopher could love. Because if you look at it, you know, given what Isan just showed us with the horse, there is something a little bit peculiar about the fixation on these abstract terms. But let me try and explain why, over time, I came to love it and believe that it's actually quite important. I now think of it even as quite an indispensable term, but it's taken me a while to get there, so stay with me for a second. So the first thing to say about metacrisis is there's a really straightforward, kind of lazy description, which does kind of work, and then there's a deeper description. So the kind of easy one is the metacrisis is the description of all the crises in the world put together. So at its most basic, the metacrisis is all of that stuff that's going wrong is the metacrisis, right? That's sort of the first level of analysis. But that doesn't actually get you very far, and for that idea, you could just as well use macro crisis or polycrisis or the big crisis or the climate crisis and all the other crises. It doesn't actually tell you much analytically. It doesn't give you any descriptive explanatory purchase, right? So what is this word meta doing? And why is it, first of all, whenever you have two terms together, by the way, you have three jobs to do, right? You have, what are the two terms? What does one term mean? What does the other term mean? And what do they mean together, right? And then there's a fourth job where the artists come in and, you know, then it's like, what kind of artistic or creative work is that term doing? What is it generating? What sensibilities are coming out of it? What kind of an act is it to name things in that way? But I'll leave the others, Ishan especially, to speak to that. So I'll tell you the definition I gave in a recent essay. It's called Prefixing the World, and then I'll try to talk around it, just so you have some grounding in where I'm coming from. Here's how I put it there. I say, the metacrisis is the historically specific, that's important, the historically specific threat, also important, to truth, beauty, and goodness, caused by our persistent misunderstanding, misvaluing, and misappropriating reality. The metacrisis is the crisis within and between all the world's major crises. It is a root cause that is at once singular and plural. It is a multifaceted delusion, arising from the spiritual and material exhaustion of modernity that permeates the world's interrelated challenges and manifests institutionally and culturally to the detriment of life on Earth. So that's the kind of, that's where I ended up, right? That definition. I can share it again, but it's sort of, in some ways it's easier just to speak around it. What's going on is meta is there to get beyond a mere description into a deeper explanation of root causes. Okay, meta is used as within or between or beyond all of the crises that we observe in the world. Meta is there to try and explain what's happening at the root of these things, at the base of these things. Now, there are several metacrisis theorists now, and there's a kind of history to the concept and so on. My own take is a little distinct, but it's quite similar in some ways to the others. I think a relatively easy way into it is one given by Daniel Schmachtenberger, where he speaks about the term he uses is underlying generator functions. So it's quite a computer-like language, but underlying generator functions of the world's major crises. And he calls these the fact that there's exponential technology, which means basically technology that creates more technology ad infinitum, often with the aim of winning in a certain way. And that's connected to what he calls rivalrous dynamics, the second underlying generator function. And thirdly, that we're consuming our own ecological substrate. In other words, it's not just that we're harming the environment, it's that we're actually undermining the very basis through which the ecologies can repair themselves. So, to use a financial analogy, we can no longer rely on the interest because we're actually eating into our capital, we're eating into our principal. So that's one way into it, to see those underlying generator functions. But there's a little problem with that explanation, and I think Shinta and others would sort of see this. It's that it's almost an entirely exterior explanation. It's an explanation of the world as as a mechanism. What is more challenging is get to what it's like from a participatory point of view, a perspectival point of view. What does Metacrisis feel like? What is it like to live through it? And there you get to this notion of the spiritual and material exhaustion. So the spiritual exhaustion gets to the idea that the story has run out. The modernist story that's based upon the nation state, science, war, the idea of progress, the idea of competition, the idea of indefinite growth, the idea of conquering planets and so on. The contention is that as we see ecological collapse and our inability to deal with it adequately, and as we see technology going out of control, controlled by increasingly vested powerful interests, we begin to doubt the story of modernity. We say, look, we need something radically different. And the thing about stories is you can't just bring them off from the wings and put it onto the stage and say, hey guys, I found you a new story, let's go with this one. Stories have to emerge endogenously, organically from the situation we're in, which is why the historically specific reference really matters. We have to somehow find within our historical context the green shoots of a new story, and we also have to begin to sort of create the story ourselves, be the actual actors that bring it into being, which is why artists of all kind, cultural creators of all kinds have a particularly important role at this time, because there's a sense in which they have to prefigure a new world, a world that's not just a kind of random story, but is somehow enacted and experienced as being the new kind of normal, the new kind of reality. So that's a rough take on the Metacrisis. There's more to say, but it also gives you an idea of what it means to respond to it. It's something to do with the whole predicament on the outside and the inside, and it's attempting to begin to shift it at the cultural roots. That's roughly how I see it.
Wow. There's still quite a lot to unpack there, but this is a very great start. So in an attempt to summarize what you just said, is that we can understand the Metacrisis in several ways, right? Like we can see it as the ultimate crisis that's underlying all those other crises, right? The climate, AI, education, etc., etc., etc. It's between it, it's beyond it, it's under it. We can also see it as the thing that stands between us and truth, beauty, and goodness. I loved that in your definition, in the long term. And we can think about it also as this, the time has come now that modernity has exhausted itself, right? Modernity as that era in which we thought that our idea of technological progress and capitalism and individualism was going to take us very far. But this is the point to which it has taken us. This is it. This is the end point. Final stop. So multiple ways to understand it, and thank you for defining it for us. Also, not only with your head, but also with your soul, I would say. I'm curious what you make of it, Shinta, of course, or what your main question is, and also Ehsan, because he brought you in specifically, that there's a job for the artists in defining this, right? We can talk about meta, we can talk about crisis, we can talk about it put together, but then we have to make sense of it and see what emerges from it, as in the creative potential of this word. So I'm curious about both things. Whoever is ready first can talk.
Yeah, you want me to go? Well, there's quite a lot here. So, first, to speak on the idea of modernity, that in terms of economics, that is the question, right? So there was this idea of it leading us to a certain point of modernity or civilization or development and progress and everything. That's the whole gist of it. And that's long believed to be the story underneath the system. And it has produced a certain systemic feedback, symptoms, that might point us to the direction that we're not moving into the age of modernity as we may have wanted it. Because we see this, and I get to the invasive bit, because you both spoke about it, Jonathan and Essan, and it's really interesting. We see this systemic feedback, right? So we see this severe brokenness within societies, with this huge gap between rich and poor that is just sustained by free market thinking, right? This Oxfam Nova report just published says it will take 460 years, I believe, to eradicate poverty globally, but it will just take 10 years for the next trillionaire to stand up. Now, if that's not fragmentation, or if that's not a problem with distribution or a trickle-down effect, then I don't know what is. So there's a deep fragmentation right there. And then we see it also with our relationship to the living world. So climate change, the huge loss of biodiversity, they can all be led back to our economic doing and thinking. Then as well, to the human spirit. Most people find themselves, they say that they find themselves in a rat race. But now these huge numbers of depression and burnout, suicide attempts, and then this new phenomenon psychologically, eco-grief, that people that are coming of age are actually suffering from, says something that the wealth of nations is taking a blow to the health of nations, right? The mental health of nations. And then there's this dubious idea of doing business, where the shareholder will always win from the stakeholder, right? So we can say something about how economics is super invasive. To what Jonathan mentioned was the universal values in philosophy. So the good, the truth, the beauty. Right. And that just leaves this grave, grave wound. And I really think that we cannot leave out this existential dimension. We have to tend to it. And we really have to try to come to terms with it, that we're in it, that we need to do something with it, and it really appeals to us. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, not really, but that's okay. I mean, I think this is important reflection, and we'll continue on digging into this in a second. But Essan, just super briefly, just this word alone, metacrisis, does it bring any creativity to you, or somebody?
Yeah, I think it's a huge term. As when I'm listening to Jonathan and how beautifully Cynthia said things about it, and how we need to come to terms with these things. I think as a thinker, that's my life, to be born into a crisis and to constantly look at things that how I am existing in a crisis, and how this crisis is generating in many different forms. But I think, as Cynthia said, that maybe it is an attitude also to bring yourself to terms, to hug the crisis at one point, but also to try to negotiate with it, to evolve with it. And I guess that is also what we are doing, to figure out the problem first and trying to figure out the solutions maybe in the later talks.
Nice.
Maybe coming to the term of how, I don't know if I'm taking too long, referring to one of my works, I guess because I'm here as an artist, so I will be talking about my works. It's called Goose on the Sand. And it's a relationship between me as a maker, me as a doer, me as an actor, or as an active part with something, with my subject or an object, and my relationship with it. So the work starts with this title and also the setup, where I create this small island of the sand and put the goose on it. And then next to it, the title says Goose on the Sand. But then it's up to the goose if it wants to stay on the sand or if it wants to walk away. And maybe when you've walked into the hall and the room, you've seen the sand and maybe the footsteps of the goose. but probably you've seen the goose outside in the
Somewhere
corridor
else.
somewhere.
Yeah.
So that is probably also how you negotiate with what you want and what you require and
Yeah.
what you need,
Yeah.
in Cynthia's words, and how you can get still something exciting out
Yeah.
of that. So it's kind of a
Nice.
relationship between
Yeah.
a maker and so-called the creation that was created by this
Yeah,
maker.
I love the analogy,
Yeah.
and also need the hug, negotiate with it, and evolve with it. Where'd you find the goose? Just where'd you get it?
Usually, I make works where I see outside.
Yeah.
I've worked a lot with animals, especially domestic animals in Pakistan, because they're part of the cityscape. We
Yeah.
live together. We share a space together.
Uh-huh.
It's a different kind of living and different kind of relationship you have with animals there.
Yeah.
So you sometimes you see some things and you think that you can develop it a little bit more and make something out of it.
And there you
so-
go. Yeah, goose
so
on
it
the
was
sand.
the goose which gave me this idea rather than me coming up with the idea first and then making
Yeah.
the work.
Nice. Thank you for that. Okay, I want to involve everyone again. Invite you back into this conversation. And for that, I would also really love, we're so happy that they're here, Amanda Tse and Marcel Heijnen to the stage. They will accompany us in this exercise with music. So let's give them a warm welcome. Also, people watching at home, I invite you to participate, and Shinta will lead us in this exercise. So grab a piece of paper and a pen.
Thank you, Lynn. We're already there yet. I hope you had a bit of an idea of what we wanted to discuss about the metacrisis and the existential dimension beneath this economics transition. Now, obviously, we're not just talking about the metacrisis, but we also want to speak about navigating it, and then also maybe see what wants to emerge from it. So we have two questions for you. The first one is, let me first say, we have two questions for you. You can take some time to write down on your piece of paper what your answers will be. And we have about 5 minutes to do so. So this is just a very short exercise. So first question, here it goes. How do you want your future to make you feel? And the second question is, what do you need to direct your attention to make that come alive even more? Yes, I will repeat it. How do you want your future to make you feel? What do you need to direct your attention to make that come alive even more? One more time?
Yeah. Maybe the second one, indeed, like...
Yes. How do you want your future to make you feel? And what do you need to direct your attention to make that come alive?
Yeah. What do you need to direct your attention to make that come alive? Just to clarify. Thank you. That was amazing. Actually, a reminder that truth and beauty and goodness are among us. They're right here. Yeah. Thank you. All right, I would love to hear some of your responses. Just briefly, what you want to share on either of the questions. How do you want it to feel, that future? And what do you need to direct your attention to get there? Anyone? Yeah, the mic is coming your way.
Hi, so for the first question, I wrote initially secure, but then I thought a bit more about what I was actually trying to express, and I think it was more about certainty. And I think a lot of it is about when you understand the issues, but then feeling in a way disabled to do something meaningful about that. And how could you, let's say, deal with what you want versus what is actually happening, and what we, I think, said at the beginning of this talk of, who's in power and who's pulling the strings, and how much influence can we have on that. So ultimately being able to find that certainty of reaching a better future or more secure future.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And one more response?
I think adding on to that feeling of certainty, I wrote trust from a similar place, but without having the need of control, of knowing what the steps are to get there, but feeling this trust in humanity, in our collective effort towards change, and essentially not feeling anxious about it anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
like trusting the goose.
Kind of.
Yeah. All right, I would love to build on your responses here and talk about moving forward, right? Like, how do you want to say something, Shinta?
Well, I do. I just want to ground this exercise a little bit more in something that we've spoken about, is the appeal to imagination or to imagery, and we were also speaking about asking Jonathan maybe to speak on that a little bit more, because there's a value in this, right? That I would really like us to understand better.
Yeah, go for it. Ask the question.
So Jonathan, I heard you just speak about. You're already nodding. In a recent podcast, you spoke about the difference between the imaginary, imagination, and imaginal, and I think that is really important for us to maybe build on that idea of the existential dimension a little bit more. Could you speak to that?
It's a delicious question. Thank you. So they all sound very similar, and especially if I know that in the Netherlands you speak almost perfect English, but even so, in any second language, it can be quite tough to parse the difference between the imaginary, sometimes called the social imaginary or the collective imaginary, the imaginal, and imagination. They're all importantly different things. Let me take them one at a time. So the one that's most familiar is your imagination, and that's basically your mind's capacity to depict things that are not materially present. It's a way of seeing. It's not just fantasy that you sort of create stories and imaginary creatures and aliens and stuff. Your imagination is really your perceptive capacity to go beyond what's materially present. And so to develop the imagination is really critical for bringing in other worlds, for prefiguring a different kind of world, for showing different sensibilities and so on. So the imagination is a cognitive capacity. It's also an affective capacity and a creative capacity. So think of the imagination as something that humans do that can be cultivated, right? The social imaginary is something different. That's something more. It's sometimes called the sacred canopy, It's another way of putting the overall structure of the world and fabric of the world that we take up to be normal. So the social imaginary is it's not just the paradigm, it's not just ideology, it's not just the system, it's kind of beyond all of that. It's the holding pattern for the world as we know it. So when we refer to the social imaginary, that's of the present day, that's the thing that makes, for example, being on your phone seem normal, or buying milk in the supermarket seem normal, or the things that we do that are just given, but we don't question. It's the kind of, you could think of the social imaginary to humans as water is to fish. It's the thing that we don't really see because we see through it. It defines us, right? The imaginal is a much more deeply psychotropic, psychoactive, and I would say even esoteric, certainly spiritual idea. The imaginal it's almost as it's the world. It's in the you can see it in the word. What all these words have in common is the common root, image, right? It's a world of images. So the imaginal is the world of the language of the soul, if you like. It's the language of dreams. It's the language of the psyche unmediated by conceptual interference. So what happens with the imaginal is that some believe it's just kind of active features of the psyche, but there are many others, Jungian therapists among them, who believe that the imaginal has its own reality. It's another feature of the world. It's another dimension of reality that we can tune into to some extent from now and again. And that's what gives rise to so-called synchronicities and coincidences, the experiences we have of intense meaning, where there's an uncanny moment of something occurring that connects with something else in our life or a thought we just had. And we can always explain this away with our intellect. The rationalist, the skeptic, have their legitimacy there, and you can even go crazy if you look into these things too much. But most of us, if we're honest, have these moments of deep meaning and significance where it feels like another world is superimposed on this one. And that's where the imaginal realm is having its moment of causality. And they sometimes speak of imaginal causality in that way. And those who feel we're really trapped in the climate crisis and the metacrisis often feel that to escape it, not only do we need a new social imaginary, which is the kind of existential dimension that Shinta's referring to. In other words, we need a new idea of normal, a new idea of what it is to be human, what it is to live well. And not only do we need greater imaginative capacity to get there, but we also arguably need to sort of access the imaginal realm, to actually bring to bear sort of suprahuman, non-human forces to somehow help us navigate our plight. Something like that.
Can I just?
Yeah,
thanks.
please.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. It really, I think this distinction is super important, particularly because somebody said something about power. What we're seeing, of course, is that the existing regime is on a pathway to collapse. So there's kind of a shift in power there to the emergent regime, right? That which is unfolding and which is in the margins of society. It's doing and failing and experimenting, and it's starting to. It's not even institutionalized just yet. It's just anyway. If we shift our attention towards the emergence, we might see something that has more influence or more power, and this is the realm that I was speaking about. That this is the realm of values that are informing the story that might be an economy or whatever we're going to call it at some point. But anyway, this imaginal. I think is needed, that layeredness is needed to understand how we move to from a materialistic point of view to a post-materialistic point of view.
Yeah, to me it's also deeply profound and very touching, actually, the way you explain it. I'm also curious about how it touches you, Esan, that explanation.
Yeah, I think
As a visual artist.
As a visual artist, that's what,
and as a human
that's
being.
what you do. Or I guess, of course, there are different kind of practices, but I think as a person in creative field, it is the most important aspect of your thinking. And I think it is the combination of all these three that has to play a very major role in creating something, anything profound. And I guess that is why we tend to, once we get the taste of this doing or this act of this field or this profession, that's why we tend to stay in this, because the other part is very far from us. Be it the kind of economy that we're talking about here, that has taken over.
Yeah.
Be it the kind of power that we don't want to be a part of, because it is devoid of these inclusions. And that is why it does not have even the power of this imagination that we value through this imaginal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would also love to build on this question, Jonathan, and ask you. I read in one of the Perspectiva pieces, interviews, that many people that want to work on change, right, in society, still operate within the bounds of what's politically possible and culturally acceptable, and that we can feel that we need to go beyond that, which is, can you say a little bit more about that, and maybe also give us some clue on how to possibly go beyond that, what's politically possible and culturally acceptable?
Well, that is in some ways the question. So Shinta rightly pointed out that we live in a time where we observe one world slowly collapsing. It's important to emphasize slowly. I mean, it can happen, it can quicken, and arguably it is quickening. But that's not good news. We shouldn't confuse, even if it's a system whose time has come, and even if it's full of violence and delusion. And by the way, the quick answer to what the Metacrisis is delusion, if you want a one-word answer. But even if that's the case, our hope rests in building the alternative quickly enough, such that as one world collapses, the other is sort of ready to, partly to catch it and feel it, and partly to let it die, and partly to keep alive what is good about it as new things arise. So what does that mean in practice? Well, there are some who think it's all about resisting and speaking truth to power, and others who believe that the existing power structures are the problem, and that instead of actually working within them, we need to build a kind of parallel polis, to actually build we can't really escape modernity and late stage modernity, including capitalism, including democracy that's arguably ceasing to function very well. Nor can we really escape the ecological plight or the technological miasma, let's say, the sort of technology beginning to define the world. So what can we do, right? We have to exist in that world. We can't really escape it, but we can build a parallel world with a different kind of underlying culture, with different forms of institutions, different ways of humans relating to each other. And the way we do that, and these are broad brushstrokes, so forgive me for tonight, but it would be roughly cosmolocal. And by cosmolocal, I mean all hope of becoming human again, of feeling more deeply true to who we are, rests in the local and the specific and the embodied and the enacted. And we need to get back to that aspect of our life. That can mean anything from growing your own vegetables to creating your own energy, to creating your own work. But it would be naive to think that that doesn't take place within this monstrous regime that we're part of. And alongside that, we have to think about the future of the polity. And is it the nation state? Do we really see the nation state surviving the next 50 years? Maybe, but others think we have to go towards bioregional governance, which means that we build our lives around something that's really real, not the social construction of governments and institutions around it, but also the things like the mountain range and the rivers and the sea and the desert, and the things that actually define an area being somehow the basis for our social practice, which in turn gives rise to our political practice. And then alongside those things, you would hope for a different kind of sensibility, a different cultural sensibility that was, well, I don't want to be too naive. I don't think it's all loving kindness. I'm personally quite nervous of the vision of a world without any struggle. For me, partly with my chess background, I want a bit of resistance. You know, I don't want a world that's entirely playing the harps and bathing in the sunlight. You know, a little bit of resistance and struggle seems to me critical, but the culture should reflect that. So it has to be a peaceful future, because the weapons are so powerful that any future of war will destroy the entire thing. So you're therefore looking at forms of peace, which is about not being lacking in conflict, but rather sublimating conflict and channeling conflict in the right way, so that we're all quite alive and full of the contestation that is some of our best vitality, but it's no longer being wasted in the lives of young men especially, but you know, buildings being destroyed and children being murdered because we're so deluded. We will always have those baser instincts, but we have to find a way to redirect them. So that's how I see it. It's a kind of parallel project. I think it's naive to think this world will end tomorrow. We have to somehow build it as it's ending, and hope that as one thing ends, the other is ready to take its place.
Yeah. Fantastic summary of the pathways forward. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. One more notion I would like us to touch upon before I open the...
I'm so sorry. I'm going to disappear for a second to get my charger, otherwise my laptop's going to die. I'm sorry about that. Be back in 1 second.
Yeah. Before I open the conversation up to one or two questions from you in the audience, this notion of interiority, to also bring it back down to the existential, right? That make it about us anyway, not in a narcissistic way. But can we speak about that? Maybe, Shinta, you can also quickly say like why that is important as a notion, interiority.
I think that it's important to speak about it and integrate it into the discourse. So we do not only speak about exterior circumstances and things to change outside of ourselves. So very often we say the system needs to change, but then who's the system? So I think speaking about the metacrisis really allows us to explore this area a little bit more and say this inner world is as important, if you take the notion as within, so without. And then also we can explore what is our sphere of influence, what can we do, and keep that close to ourselves. Yeah.
Makes sense. And Ehsan, indeed, this idea of as within, so without, like creates like also it's a reflection of what's happening inside of us. How, as an extension of that, how do you reflect on how to be in this world? How have you thought about that through your work?
Yeah, I think it's probably I'll be thinking about this question all my life. Probably that is how the thinking starts.
Yeah.
That is how the consciousness starts. How to be and how to be in the world. It's a huge question, and
no,
I think
it's not.
I think as huge questions usually don't have an answer, but I'll still try to explain how.
Maybe give us some like little ingredients that you found through your work.
I think it's generally a response towards certain crises. I think that's how I probably rephrased the question, if I'm not wrong. And I mostly I have. It becomes about me, but since you asked me, I think mostly I have a very passive response towards certain crises. And I think I am not a very active participant to the change, to bring a change. but I would hate it if everyone is like me. And so I take this role, which is a part of the bigger system. I'm probably that kind of a cog, which is a bit slower. But its speed has its own probably benefits. I don't know. But I try to look at things in a very passive way, and I try to not come up with a very quick response towards things. If I don't know if this is the answer to your question.
No, I
If it
think
is not,
yeah, in a way,
Yeah.
indeed. I think also for me personally, not to like jump on something or respond as quick as you can. I think that is indeed what the situation is asking from us to.
Yeah, I think I saw the image of my work, so maybe we can talk about it again. Referring to the crisis, this was the project that was of an exhibition called "Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste." I can have my disagreement with the title of the project, but it worked as a creature that is evolving through different crises that it is facing. It is the evolution of one creature into two, both facing different directions, pulling each other in different ways. One the creature of the water, and the other one from the soil, from the dryness, the water hanging in the middle, describing their existence and coexisting, having two opposite existences or concerns or ideas, with an image at the bottom. If you see, there's a table and the photo of a ghost town that used to be a town. So there's this shipbreaking yard in Karachi in Pakistan, where there's this huge ship comes in, and then there's a labor that is hired for that, and then they cut the ship, and the project goes on for years sometimes. So temporarily they build up a whole place for them to live and to eat and to stay. So it's kind of a temporary town that they create out of all the wood that comes out of the ship, because they cannot reuse it. And then they live there to create this, to work on the ship. And then once the ship is broken down, then they move out. So this is the reminiscent of that ghost town that used to be there. So in disintegrating, devolving, changing into oblivion in an apocalyptic manner. So the work is about a homage to that, a memory of this situation that was once alive and not there anymore. So,
yeah, very in tune with what we are all saying right now. Thank you. All right. I think we have space for one question from the audience, if anyone has a question that's burning in you. Yeah, we have one here. The microphone. Yes, thank you.
So my question is structured from 3 questions. Can I do it or not? Okay, not.
Let's try it. Try to keep it brief.
Okay. I think what I struggle the most is, first, do you think the change in global society, in global thinking, should and can come only from bottom up, or have to come from top down, as like design new system that people will adapt, or we can trust communities, countries, societies, that it come from them, from bottom up?
Big question. Okay.
Yeah.
Part 2 was?
Part 2, and I skipped part 1, but part 2 is, we see always in this shift of powers that the people that want to shift the power, they see the people in power as they, and we are we, and the shift of power is just imitating after the the power of the system is changing. It's just imitating again the power relations.
Yeah.
And then what I'm trying to ask, if you give any thought of that meta-crisis is gonna change the system, if how won't we
reproduce the same
exactly
power inequalities in
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Wow. Okay. I think we can do an entire episode about this question, but let's give it a little jab. Or maybe Jonathan, or
Who are you looking at?
who feels called?
Yes, Jonathan.
Jonathan is like, oh, okay.
Quite a swift response. So in terms of the top-down or bottom-up question, I think the answer is both and, in the sense that there will always be a scope for design, for regulation, for governance will always have something to do at the most global level and then at the national level and so on. That's not going anywhere. The key is to do as little as possible at that level. And so top-down has a role, bottom-up has a role, because that's all the things I was mentioning about cosmo-local culture, new sensibilities, and building the parallel polis. That all comes bottom-up. But there's also two things I would add. One is, let's say, side to side. Instead, top down, bottom up, and then side to side. And side to side is something like the work being done to reduce polarization, to find the others, so that you actually have something like a coherent collective we that's working to build the world together, instead of a huge amount of energy being lost through sort of pointless conflict. There's a lot to be said for sort of creative opposition, but not squandering energy on polarization and just spending all of your time criticizing the other side. And the last thing, from after top down, bottom up, and side to side, is inside out. And inside out is really the kind of spiritual injunction to transform the nature of the problem. So where you say, if we change those in power, we'll just replicate the same thing. It is true that basically, if you don't, there's a beautiful quotation by Robert Pirsig in his famous book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he says that there's so much talk of changing the system that completely misses the point. That if you don't understand that, in effect, I'm paraphrasing here, systems have psyches, systems have epistemologies, systems have souls. And because of that, if you only think about systems change, you will indeed replicate and have the same problem again. Which is why, personally, I place my faith in something that's more deeply about a spiritual change, a change of heart and mind, a kind of metanoia where we actually see reality differently. And that's not just kind of airy-fairy pipe dream stuff. It's grounded in a new view of consciousness being an ontological primary, one of the main things in reality, value being something that's not just plucked off the shelf, kindness, compassion, whatever, value being like a real attractor that exists in the real world that we actually can perceive and feel. So there's many of these other things whereby a shift in who we are is a real proposition to deal with the problem you alluded to, which is the risk of perpetuating the same problems with the same kinds of solutions. We need a shift of mindset to avoid that. And the shift of mindset is not just wishful thinking, it is grounded.
Thank you. Thank you. Challenge accepted by Jonathan, and nailed it once again. We have come to the end, pretty much. Well, we have one really beautiful treasure for you, but I do want to come back to you, Shinta, and maybe you can weave in what you wanted to say in this question of what do you take away? What was the big gifts of the evening for you?
Yeah, there's quite a lot here, right? So if I can just ramble a little bit. What Jonathan just ended with, saying that it is grounded, I think that's quite important. When you look at the work of Donella Meadows, quite intuitively, you know, the professor on systems thinking at MIT, she has this beautiful essay with 12 points, leverage points, to intervene into systems. And the one that is most impactful is actually simply to change one's mind and to see that thinking that there is a paradigm is in itself a paradigm. And then looking to find a way to move beyond that idea of needing that paradigm, which is in a way enlightenment. And then also what really helps me to navigate this whole world actually is to understand that we can never fully come to grips or control or understand everything about complex living systems. We can only do as much as we can do, and that really again brings me back to the interior and the idea that we are. That's the reason why we are speaking about the metacrisis right now, because we could easily fill like 10 nights about the exterior, right? The system, the economy, the whole world and everything. But there's just so much to still unpack here. And I've been thinking quite a lot about the liminal space, because particularly in transitions, we really love talking about the liminal space. Like, and there's something really interesting about it, because as this is where our addiction to linearity really comes forth, right? We think there's an old system, and then there's a liminal space, and then there's a new system.
Liminal as in the space between the two.
The space between worlds, or, yeah, right. And I've come to think more and more that this old and this new, they are timelines unfolding at the same time. And maybe, just maybe, it's actually what Jonathan spoke about being the parallel polis, right? It exists next to the existing polis. But maybe this liminal space is the space. Joanna Macy has this beautiful essay on Emergence magazine, saying that the liminal space is a space where you enter, and there you find the Buddha. I think she calls it the Buddha, Ashkobya, I think, and he holds up a mirror. I'm sorry, and he holds up this mirror. She says it's entering the bardo, and he holds up this mirror, and it's for us to look into that mirror. And maybe, just maybe, that's one of the biggest assignments of our time, while this existing polis and this parallel polis are emerging or are unfolding or whatever, and we continuously come back to that mirror and look in it and really radically accept what we see. And I think that's what the music video was about in the beginning, that we really have to come to grips to that. And then just one last point that I really take away, because as a researcher, there's a responsibility here, right? To seek ways, I think, I'm now sensing, we have to negotiate the world around us. And I think that economics has been decontextualized over time. And there's this trauma therapist who speaks about decontextualization being, well, another important issue that we can fill up a whole evening about. Anyway, it speaks to the fact
to have you define everything.
It speaks to the fact to come into relationality again. Right? To see if we can create that through relationality, that biophilia again, and really relate to the world and really love that world again, and see what wants to come forth from that. So maybe this is a bit of a
well, thank you for inviting us into your mind for a moment.
Into my interiority
that is being sparked, and I'm sorry we cannot indeed dive into every point that you're bringing in, but I'm happy we have a couple of weeks to go. As we process what we've heard and what we felt, I would love to invite Amanda and Marcel to play one more song for us. Give them a more applause. Thank you. What a gift. Thank you so much, Amanda, Marcel. We've officially reached the end of our conversation together here. If I try to summarize it in the shortest way, we started this journey speaking about letting go of some of these things we thought were holy grails in the economy, and this realization that we need to transform and that we need to bring ourselves into it, that existential dimension, that what is me, what am I doing here? We spoke about understanding this idea of the metacrisis as that thing that's between and beyond and underlying all these big crises of our time, this modernity exhausting itself, and the thing that you know, like kind of prevents us from living our truth, beauty, goodness, but with a bit of struggle and resistance, because it shouldn't be all harps and marshmallows. Then we spoke about this idea of, you know, we need a new social imaginary, we need to use our imagination, and we have this imaginal dimension that which our souls can tune into and feel into, like, hey, this is what we might feel is possible. And this is what's alive under the surface, maybe already. And then build that, translate that into the new as soon as we can, and make it local, make it specific, make it embedded. And look in the mirror, indeed, while building that. And I think Ehsan is the great example of, you know, someone providing that mirror for us. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Shinta, fantastic start to your fellowship, I would say. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is just a beginning, the first episode, and the next one will be on Monday, February the 26th, and that will be about the healing, you know, healing from where we are now, healing responses. And after that, a third episode on March 25th about the sanctuary. So I invite all of you to be part of that as well. Also, Designing Cities for All on the next Monday, February 5th, has a book launch. The book is called Teaching Design for Values, Concepts, Tools, and Practices, together with TU Delft. So you can find that on our website as well. You're also very welcome, while you're on that website, to become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger, because these programs are always free and accessible for everyone. If you become a friend, you help make it possible. For now, thank you so much again for watching. For more info about Designing Cities for All, you can go to dezwijger.nl/DCFA. And for now, I wish you a beautiful evening.